for VOA Economics in Special English. In January, the World Bank released its Global Economic Prospects Report. World Bank experts are using the words fragile and uncertain to describe the economic recovery this year. Their report predicts the global economy will grow a little over 2% in 2013 and slightly more in the following 2 years. Predictions of limited growth have become familiar since the financial crisis 4 years ago. Wealthy countries are expected to have slower growth than developing ones as they deal with larger amounts of debt and big budget deficits. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim is urging developing countries to become growth drivers. But he notes that it is important to build a foundation for growth that can last over time. He says the developed world needs to help developing countries make gains in health, infrastructure, and education. Andrew Burns was lead author of the report. He says it is not only important to build roads and bridges, but to invest money in health care and effort in government reforms. Some high-growth developing countries, such as China, are spending a lot on public works projects, but spend little on health care. The World Bank president says Europe and America have approved some measures to deal with economic weakness. But financial policy remains a work in progress. Still, wealthy nations remain the biggest markets for exports and providers of foreign investment. Developing countries are positioned for stronger growth, but they will face basic risks. World Bank Chief Kim said he is concerned that low grain supplies could bring high food prices, hurting the poor. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The United Nations is warning that the world is not prepared to deal with the fast growth of cities. The World Economic and Social Survey 2013 calls for new ways to meet the needs. More than 6.5 billion people are expected to be living in cities by 2050. Most new city dwellers will be in developing countries. The United Nations says the effect on limited resources in many countries will be huge. The World Economic and Social Survey notes the increasing demands for energy, water, sanitation, public services, education, and healthcare. The world population is expected to rise to more than 9 billion by 2050. 2/3 of all people are expected to live in cities. The United Nations says about 80% of this growing urban population will be found in Africa and Asia. The report says sustainable development of urban areas requires coordination and investments to deal with important issues. These include land use, food security, job creation, and transportation. William Vandergeest is with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. He says cities need to work closely with rural communities so that food supplies can be secured and the environment can be protected. The report also examines the problem of food insecurity, which affects hundreds of millions of people around the world. 1 in 8 people is still chronically undernourished. The Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, Shamshad Akhtar, says world food production will have to increase by 70%. That increase will be needed to feed the additional 2.3 billion people expected on the planet by the middle of the century. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Persutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. The World Economic Forum says the most likely risk facing the world over the next 10 years is a big difference between rich and poor. The estimate was made in a new report called the World Economic Forum's Global Risks 2013. Food availability and the spread of terrorism are noted every year, but new risks, especially technological and economic ones, are getting more attention. The report was based on surveys of more than 1,000 experts from around the world. They considered the likelihood and impact of risks should they become reality. Sharp income disparity was considered the most likely problem to take place in the next 10 years. This is the second straight year that a wealth gap was named. Next was what the report called chronic fiscal imbalances, or the failure of governments to deal with heavy debt over time. The risk said to have the biggest possible impact was a major failure in the world financial system, like the collapse of a top institution or currency. But experts rated a water supply crisis as second on the list of high-impact risks. How the experts changed their opinions is also something to note. This year, the mismanagement of the aging population moved from the 18th to the 5th most likely threat. The failure to deal with the costs and social issues involved with an aging population is now considered a risk with much greater potential impact. There were also extreme possibilities. The report called these X factors. They include the likelihood of our climate going out of control and even the discovery of alien life. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.